I want to thank you all for being here tonight on this meeting on our water sensors. My name is Diane Rosenberg. I'm the president of the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture, IRA, and the executive director of Jefferson County Farmers and Neighbors, JFAN. IRA is a coalition of community, state, and national organizations. We advocate for a factory farm moratorium until there are fewer than 100 water impairments. IRA also advocates for stronger CAFO and water protection regulations, and that's why we're here tonight. So tonight we're focusing on water quality, and a major way we know we're making progress in that area, or not, is having a real-time nitrate sensor network in operation. So funding for our state-of-the-art and nationally respected Iowa Water Quality Information System Network ends on June 30th, unless we can get the state legislators to renew the funding. The money is there, it's a matter of will, and we need to demand our legislators allocate it. Now, Iowa ranks number 2 in the nation for cancer, and it's one of the 2 states where cancer rates are rising. A newly released report by the Harkin Institute and the Iowa Environmental Council, called The Environmental Risk Factors and Iowa's Cancer Crisis, addresses and confirms the connection between consuming high rates of nitrates in drinking water and certain cancers. And last year's major water quality report, the Central Iowa Source Water Research Assessment, or CISRA, that report found that 80% of nitrates in the Central Iowa watershed came from agriculture. And that has ramifications for not just that watershed, but all of us around the state. Now, our legislature, however, has barely done anything this year to address water quality and agriculture. But there is something that legislators still can do and need to do, and that's to restore and expand funding for our real-time nitrate water quality sensor network through the University of Iowa's IIHR Hydroscience and Engineering program. Now, this network has about 60 water quality sensors across the state, and they continuously assess real-time nitrate data every 15 minutes. This allows small municipal water systems to get early warnings of high nitrate levels so they can take steps to bring down those nitrate levels and keep Iowans safe. It would only cost 32 cents a person each year to continue and expand the system. And honestly, that's not very much. Now, to give you the context about the importance of the water sensors, we have 2 really wonderful speakers here tonight. And they're going to first present the findings of the CISRA report, and they're going to talk about the importance of the water sensors in keeping Iowans safe. I'm very pleased that John Norris, the former Polk County Administrator, is here with us tonight. John is the person who originally came up with the idea for the study and who lobbied for 6 months to get it approved and funded. And I'm also really happy to have Dr. Adam Shriver, the Director of Wellness and Nutrition at the Harkin Institute, who made it possible for this report to go very public by holding a major meeting of its findings last August at the Harkin Institute. Because as you might imagine, with the results like that, there are certain industry groups that maybe would rather not that information be so public. Now, there are many important policy recommendations that came out of that CISRA report, and John is going to tell you about a number of them, but most especially he's going to focus on one of the main recommendations around the monitoring network. So before we begin, let me give you a quick overview of tonight's format. We're going to first screen a condensed version of last summer's Harkin meeting, and Adam will introduce that. I've seen it twice, and I can tell you the information is really compelling. Then John is going to talk about some of the policy recommendations, and there are a lot of them, that came out of that assessment. But tonight he's going to talk a lot about one of the major recommendations, and that's to restore funding and expand the water sensor network. After that, we'll get into the lobbying section of the meeting. Debbie Bunker, the membership director for the Iowa Farmers Union, who's also a member of IRA. She'll go over a script, some talking points, and tips on lobbying. Everything you really need to know to make it really easy to make those calls on Wednesday. And then we'll have time for your questions, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And I just ask that you put your questions in the Q&A box, because that's where we'll be looking for them, and we may not see any that you may put in the chat. So without any further ado, I'm going to now turn this over to Adam.
All right. Well, thank you, Diane. And thank you, everyone, for showing up for this really important topic. I am going to just say a few words in order to set up this video presentation. We edited the presentation of the Central Iowa Source Water Resource Assessment that occurred last summer. And John does a much better job telling the story of how that report came about in the first place. So I'll just say a few words about the actual presentation of it and a couple other things. So, as Diane referenced, when the report came out, there was actually, rumors behind the scenes that there was some pressure to not really like publicize the report or put much emphasis on it. And so a group of activists and people from around Des Moines and Polk County, some of whom I see are on this call, all showed up at the Polk County Board of Supervisors and expressed like how important we thought this report was. And I took the opportunity to offer that the Harkin Institute and Drake University could host the presentation of this really important report. And I think the result of that really was quite amazing. So we ended up having about 600 people show up in person for the presentation that you're about to see. It had over 3,000 views on YouTube after just a short amount of time. And so it was really just a pretty remarkable signal, I think, to many people that just how much people were really concerned about their water in central Iowa. It was also right after the lawn watering ban in Des Moines and surrounding areas where the world's most expensive or one of the most expensive and most sophisticated nitrate removal systems could no longer keep up with the nitrates in the water. I think it drove home the fact that people really care a lot about this issue. And I think you could see even after that event, many elected officials kind of changing their perspective on how important this was and how they need to talk about it. Nevertheless, I think one thing that's really important to emphasize and what I think is important about this meeting right now is that there's such a huge disconnect between how concerned the residents are and what's happening at the level of the state. And just to give another bit of evidence for that, Diane mentioned the cancer report that just came out. So the Harkin Institute, where I work, had been collaborating with the Iowa Environmental Council on this project looking at the environmental risk factors of cancer. And we did 15 listening sessions around the state last summer and talked to over 550 people. And I think what's important about that is that was not just central Iowa. It was not just, urban population areas. It was really like rural Iowa, every corner of Iowa. And out of all the places we went, the two concerns that people expressed the most were agricultural exposures and drinking water in terms of what they were worried about in terms of cancer. So I just think it's, there's such a concern among the public about this topic, and the report that Diane referenced and which Jonathan put in the chat, I think really shows that those concerns are right, and that we do need to be concerned about nitrates in the drinking water and pesticides in the drinking water. So I would encourage people to read that report. I think it's really well done. And then the other thing I just want to emphasize before we jump to the video is that one of the things you hear as an excuse for inaction on our current agricultural system and the sort of heavily intensive nature of it is, well, we just don't know enough about cancer. We just don't know enough to act. And I think first of all, the report, I think, clearly shows that we do know enough where we should act. But even if you believed that, if you sincerely believed that we don't have enough information, it would be totally wild to say that at the same time that you're cutting off funding for one of the most important sources of information that we have in order to know what's in our water. And so I think, the water quality monitoring network is just such a, important piece of information. So anyone who's saying that we don't know enough about cancer, who at the same time is saying we don't need to fund this, I don't know, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. So I think with that, I will pass it off to Jonathan to play the video. And I'll just mention quickly that it starts out with some comments for me, and then there's kind of a quick transition for the first speaker. The other ones, there's a little bit more time. So the first speaker is Professor Larry Weber at University of Iowa, who's the head of the IIHR program. So with that, we're going to show a condensed video of the Central Iowa Source Water Resource Assessment presentation at Drake University from last August. So whenever you're ready, John. I hope that we see tonight in a positive light as the continuation of an important democratic tradition. It's a tradition that I took for granted growing up in Iowa, but which now seems more important every passing day. By showing up in this room tonight, you are carrying on this tradition as well. So thank you.
River flow is vitally important to understanding the water quality and natural resources of the Des Moines and Raccoon River. The quantity of flow absolutely affects the quality as it comes into the Des Moines. That's a vital aspect of all of the water cycle and the hydrologic cycle and water processes throughout the two watersheds. The water is monitored throughout the Cicero watersheds by 24 U.S. Geological Survey stream gauges. The USGS is the gold standard in water quantity monitoring for our nation. We also have an additional 20 Iowa Flood Center stream level gauges throughout the watershed to help measure river flow throughout the watershed. Some of these gauges have been in existence and operating for over 100 years, so it gives us a very long record in terms of the water quantity and the changes in the stream flow throughout the history of the watershed. The rivers are heavily influenced by climate change and land use change throughout the watershed. We've seen statistical increases in the rainfall within the watershed, rising about 20% from 30 inches annually to 36 inches annually over the study period. And the seasonal patterns also affect our water quantity, with most of our heaviest rainfall happening in the spring and early summer months. The hydrologic peak of flooding in Iowa is June. And so from May, June, and July is when we see most of our flooding. And with climate change, we see the intensification of rainfall continuing. The most recent National Climate Assessment Report has indicated for our region that we could expect to see a 10% increase in the 5% rainiest days by 2050 and a 20% increase in that same 5% rainiest days by 2100. So to put that into context, we could expect a 5-inch rain to become 5.5 inches by 2050 and to become 6 inches by 2100. With our soils being able to accept about 2 inches of infiltration on a 24-hour period, we'll see about a 33% increase in runoff, with that 6-inch rain producing 4 inches of runoff compared to the 5-inch rain producing 3 inches of runoff today. So intensification of rainfall will lead to greater runoff and greater flooding. You can also see in the graph on the lower right-hand corner that the Cicero watersheds relative to Iowa have a very large percentage, around 80% of the land use in that area is row crop. So it's a heavily row cropped area within the watershed, and the land areas and the population within the two rivers and the watershed in total are shown here as well. In general, we've seen an increase in the flow over the past several decades. Most notably, the low flows show a statistically significant increase by about 200% in the increase in our base flow or low flow. That's predominantly attributed to the intensification of tile drainage throughout the watershed. Those low flows are coming up as the tiles continue to drain our lands throughout the summer, even after our rainfall has stopped. Our average flows have also increased about 100%, and that is also statistically significant. And so we see a base level average flow in the Des Moines and Raccoon rivers increasing as well. And then lastly, our high flows, although the increase is still minor and not statistically significant, with the changing climate, we do expect to see that continuing to increase. Climate scientists have projected for our region of the country that we will see extended dry periods that get broken by intense rain. And that was no more evident than it was last year, when a 3-year drought throughout Iowa was broken by intense rain up in northwest Iowa, impacting Spencer, Rock Valley, Rock Rapids, and so many of those small communities.
The next major topic that we covered within the Cicero report was focused on ecological health and river life. So anytime we talk about ecological health, we're really getting at the well-being of the plants and animals that form the communities that are in our water bodies. And this is a very important topic because ultimately the health of these creatures impacts the health of all of us and society. Our lives are better when the ecological communities in our water are better. There's a key word that we often like to use when talking about ecological health, and that's resilience. So anytime a water body is ecologically healthy, it naturally boosts that water body's resilience, meaning that it can handle a lot more pollution, contamination, or man-made disruption. So ecological health goes a long way for both improving the lives of the creatures that live within our watersheds and also everyone that's around them. And finally, the last major point we'd like to make when it comes to ecological health is that the areas surrounding the rivers and streams are especially important. Often we refer to these as riparian environments or riparian corridors. Protecting these environments has a number of benefits. First and foremost, this is the most surefire way to improve the ecological health of a local water body. If you allow for natural vegetation to exist in the areas around a river, you help increase the health of the fish and the aquatic organisms that live there. The second major benefit that this provides is that it can trap pollutants, so it can prevent contaminants that would otherwise be running into the stream. It can uptake them, hold on to them for a while, and generally make the waters cleaner.
I'd like to explain a little bit in the report about our drinking water resources. One of the big concerns is nitrate concentrations. The nitrate concentrations in the Raccoon and the Des Moines rivers within the watershed exceed natural levels by quite a lot. It's excluded here, but the plot on the left shows that the average concentrations of nitrate in recent decades, 1988 and so on, is about 6.1 milligrams per liter of nitrate in the Des Moines River. But if you go back to the turn of the century, turn the clock back, the average concentration, it's blocked from your view due to this other graph. But if you go back to the beginning of the turn of the century, it's always less than 1 milligram per liter nitrate. So there's been a big increase in the average nitrate concentration since settlement time, from less than 1 milligram per liter to say 6 on average. And looking at the map on the right-hand side, you can see that major rivers that were recently surveyed in the United States, including ours in the Raccoon and Des Moines, have quite high concentrations of nitrate, 6 to 8 milligrams per liter, or even more than 8 milligrams per liter, as shown by the inset on the left-hand side of the slide, which came up too early. But at any rate, this is out of more than 2,000 rivers recently surveyed, we're in somewhere around the top 1% of all rivers in the United States for nitrate concentrations, a very dubious distinction. Nitrate is a bit burden for the Des Moines Waterworks as well, because the treatment there is expensive and it's complicated. Looking at the graph on the right, you can see since 2014 for the Raccoon River, all the concentrations which exceeded the EPA standard for drinking water of 10 milligrams per liter nitrogen. 1 year, as known to you very recently, 2025, reached 18 milligrams per liter in the Raccoon. And that necessitates treatment by the Des Moines Waterworks. Now, quite unusual this year, but it has happened before. Not only was the Raccoon River above 10 milligrams per liter, but the other water sources that Des Moines depends on, including the Des Moines River and the pipe gallery, which underlies the rivers, they were all greater than 10 milligrams per liter. When everything that you have as a resource is greater than the EPA standard for drinking water, you're in trouble. The only thing left is to try to remove it, and that's what DMWW does very well, but they can't remove they don't have the capacity to remove the entire flow. And that's why the lawn watering ban had to be put into place, so that only a fraction of the total flow that goes out to customers is able to be treated. And they did so successfully and treated it below the 10 milligram per liter standard. If the drinking water flowing to customers went above 10, the Des Moines Waterworks would have to make public notice and immediately begin to resolve the problem. You might ask, where's all the nitrate coming from? It's a good question. Shown on the graph on the right, most of it is from agricultural land, roughly 80%. And of that, 40% of the nitrate is coming from fertilizers applied directly onto the land. About 20% is coming from manure applied onto the land, and another 20% from soybeans and other legumes, which can fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere and make more nitrate available to run off in tile. Likewise, at the bottom, Des Moines Water Works reliably, as I mentioned, lowers, fortunately, the nitrate in its finished drinking water to within the EPA standards. 2015, shown on the slide, the graph on the left, was another very bad year that you might remember. The two rivers are shown at the top of that graph in orange and green, and they were frequently above 10 milligrams per liter that year also. But due to the anion exchange removal at the Des Moines Water Works, among the largest such plants in the world, they were able to get it down to the purple line on the left-hand side, roughly 6 to 8 milligrams per liter of nitrate nitrogen. Well, we shouldn't take too much comfort in that, however, because even at 6 to 8 milligrams per liter going out to the customers, that's still quite a high concentration. And the standard set by EPA was long ago at 10, based on methemoglobinemia, the blue baby syndrome, and it's somewhat outdated by recent health effects studies, which would indicate that there can be health effects at much lower concentrations, maybe 5 or 3 milligrams per liter. The concentrations that we are drinking, shown on the right-hand graph, that's the average concentration actually going out from the plant, let's say between 2 and 8 milligrams per liter. Now, these health effects that aren't a part of the standard, at least not as of yet, they include colorectal cancer, breast cancer, bladder cancer, birth defects like neural tube defects. We shouldn't take too much. The standards could change in the future, and the recent health effects would indicate that perhaps it should be even more stringent than the 10 milligrams per liter that it is right. Harmful algal blooms, blue-green algae, can create toxins in our water bodies and does. And these toxins include 4, which the Des Moines Water Works measures on a regular basis. The most famous one is microcystin. And once again, there's health advisories from EPA, but we've been able to, for the most part, meet those health advisories in the water that goes out to the public. That's because they have been managed to blend the waters, avoid the concentrations where they know that they're highest, and also a small amount is removed in the softening and the filtration process. But we do have these toxins that were also a big concern. Pesticides are another problem. The big 3 for us are shown on the left-hand slide. Left-hand part of the slide, it's glyphosate, that's Roundup, Cetacor, and atrazine. There's standards for 2 of those, and we've been able to once again meet those standards in finished drinking water. But the problem is that Iowa, shown on the map on the right, is at the epicenter of all the pesticide applications in the country due to being at the center of the Corn Belt in the nation. And so therefore, after the pesticides are applied, if we get a rainfall right after that, there are concentrations in the source water that have to be contended with and treated. You might wonder, with all this mixture of chemicals coming into our drinking water plants, what are the health effects of all of them together? And the truth is, we really don't know what the health effects of that is.
If you think about risks related to recreation, they have implications for public health, obviously, but also for economic development. If we put a lot of time and money, taxpayer dollars, into our waterways and recreation, we need to make sure that that water is safe, or else we're perhaps wasting our money. So the first thing, and I violated all of the rules of a professor. There are way too many words on this slide. Sorry. But what we measure when we measure recreational risks, the kind of risks of waterborne diseases that you might get from ingesting a little bit of our waters, or if you have an open wound, getting an infection. In order to understand that risk, we can now start to measure directly for pathogens themselves, the different organisms that make us sick. But historically, the best indicator we've had are a group of organisms called E. coli. The thing about E. coli is that it's a huge group of organisms and not all of them make us sick, but a subset of E. coli do. But we're measuring the whole family. But we're using them as indicators. So research, the standards that we use to say whether a beach is safe for recreating or a stream was based on studies that correlated those bacteria numbers to illnesses of swimmers. Our standard at our beaches, this magic number, 235 colony forming units or MPN per 100 mil, means that our risk is 36 illnesses per 1,000 swimming events. Okay, that's what the statistics related. So that means if you go in water that's higher than those levels, your risk is increased. It doesn't mean you're going to die. It means your risk of infectious disease is higher. And if there's no warning sign posted at the beach, that means your risk is lower, but it doesn't guarantee you're safe. And one of the things that we noticed working through all of these different data sets is that we can't tell where we are unless we have monitoring. Monitoring is really important. We can't see trends. We can't see hotspots if we don't have monitoring in lots of locations. The map you have here has lots of little dots, and probably from far away you can't tell the squares, which are our beaches, from the circles, which are our rivers. But these are locations that are regularly monitored by either the Army Corps of Engineers or the DNR. Polk County Conservation also does snapshot monitoring. There are other data available. Iowa State does some monitoring. But we wanted to highlight these just because we wanted a consistent data set. What we see is that E. coli in our streams is overall much higher than at our beaches, and that there are certain areas where the water exceeds the standard as much as 60 to 80% of the time. We also see trends. We see higher levels after a rain. So maybe that means you wait a day or two after a big rainstorm before you get in the stream or beach. That's not necessarily the only time that there's high risk. Some of our streams at very low flows show high risk. That means that, again, there's probably an undiluted direct discharge of some sort of waste that's going into our stream. And the risk can be high at those times too. So again, it takes monitoring to really understand the dynamics in our system. There's a lot of resources out there. If you're going to go to a beach, there's weekly monitoring. Our river systems are not monitored weekly. So it's a little bit Wild West, but you can get informed, look at existing maps, look at this 200-page report, read all of it. It's great. And then get informed about where your higher risks are located. Okay, so if you were unfortunate enough to get a serious infection from an exposure in our recreational waters, that could be made much, much worse if that infection is antibiotic resistant. We use antibiotics widely in healthcare, and some of the antibiotic resistance genes that we're finding in our streams are genes that are for those types of antibiotics that are important for public health. Again, we have just a teeny bit of data, right? So if we really want to understand our risks and the transport of antibiotic resistance in our environment, we're going to have to do some more study. But that antibiotic resistance can come from both human waste, downstream of wastewater discharges, but also in our livestock industry. If there's a fair amount of work in the livestock industry to try to minimize the use of antibiotics, but they need to do an even better job. We can't be feeding our animals antibiotics prophylactically. We need to wait until those animals have an infection and treat them the same way we do for people. Otherwise, we are really at risk of losing the availability of those antibiotics over time. On your left, you can imagine, if you can read it from the back, or your eyes are much better than mine. But we had a description of harmful algal blooms and the fact that they produce toxins that can be a risk for drinking water. They can also be a risk for recreation. At our public beaches, state park beaches, DNR goes out once a week during the recreation season, and several of our cities and counties do this as well. And they measure for that microcystin. That's an indicator, that's the toxin. And exposure to that toxin is serious and cause rashes, but also major organ failure. So they can be really serious. If the water is pea soup green, blue-green, do not get in it. And don't let your pets in it either. There is some good news on this front that I will point out. One of those bars is the percentage of samples above the standard, and that's Black Hawk Beach. For the period 2006 to 2024, that beach was above the standard a little over 10% of the time. But there is a very concerted watershed project around Black Hawk Lake, and the number of exceedances has been drastically reduced. But that required almost 100% of the landowners to get on board and work to reduce phosphorus inputs into the lake. So it is possible, but it requires absolutely everyone in a watershed to do that.
So we wanted to wrap up by talking about a topic that really impacts every chapter of this report that we've discussed so far, and that is Claire's favorite topic of manure. So manure is a byproduct of the livestock industry that we have in the States. Iowa is one of the leaders in livestock. We raise a ton of hogs, a ton of cattle, and a ton of chicken. And anytime you have those animals, they produce a lot of manure. This has become a big area of concern over the last 20 years or so because of two major trends that we see with the livestock industry. One is that the hog industry has really taken off. At around the turn of the millennium, we had about 15 million hogs within the state. Present day, that number is closer to 25 million. At the same time, we've also seen a consolidation in the farms that we have within Iowa. There are much fewer hog producers now that they had back in the day. 20, 30 years ago, it was common for many smaller farms to have several hogs out grazing around in their pasture area, have a small collection. But now we have many more concentrated animal feeding operations that pack these hogs into closer, more confined spaces. Those two trends result in the chart that I've got shown over here on the left, where back in 1997, in our watersheds, there were about 1,000 hogs per operation. That has skyrocketed over the last 25 years. Now there are over 6,000 hogs per operation within the Cicero watersheds. And this makes storing manure properly and safely much more difficult. It's a lot easier to take care of the substance when it's more spread out. But every time you have all these animals packed together, it becomes much more easy to spill these contaminants and have them get into the water in unforeseen ways. All of the information that we've discussed can be in the reports that are found online. We did set a goal for ourselves to narrow things down to the 6 topics that are of most concern. And that's what we have shown on the slides here. We also produced an executive summary. So this is a shorter 5-page document where we highlight these topics and the major things that we've highlighted throughout this presentation. I would really encourage people that are new to the issue of water quality in Iowa to start here to get a general sense for which issues are the most important and get some of the background details that are most relevant when talking about this topic. Finally, I wanted to just close our presentation tonight by circling back to nitrate. So we've learned from Jerry what an important issue nitrate is, but I want to use this as an example for why these things aren't set in stone and how these things can really vary throughout based on the decisions of everyone in Iowa. So nitrate has long been recognized as one of Iowa's major pollutants. And so about 10 years ago or so, the state government decided to fund one of the most extensive world-renowned nitrate monitoring networks that's ever been in existence. And this has operated for about the past 10 years or so. What we do with these nitrate monitoring sensors is there are devices that you can install by the side of the river, and they can very quickly and repeatedly measure the nitrate concentration that's in a water body. And because of this, we've learned a whole bunch about nitrate throughout the state. We've been able to identify areas that are particularly at risk, identify which sorts of practices, which strategies, things like wetlands, bioreactors, how well they work, and which ways of operating those are the most efficient. And we've also just been able to learn a lot about how nitrate behaves as it circulates throughout the watershed in Iowa. But the funding for this program has been ended by the Iowa government. Starting in the next year, we're set to contract this network from about 80 sensors that we've had down to about 20. And with this, there's a lot less that we can say about nitrate in the state. We simply won't be able to know which areas are most at risk. We simply won't be able to know what parts of the state are doing better, doing worse. Are things getting better or are things getting worse? So I believe when it comes to water quality in Iowa, this is a step in the wrong direction. But there are many steps that we can take that are in the right direction. And so I would really encourage anyone interested in this topic to refer to the action items that we've laid out in the report to learn more about how you can make a difference.
but I just wanted to point out a couple things you guys saw on that last photo, the comparison of going from 80 sensors to 20. You could see what a huge difference that would make for the state of Iowa if that were to happen. And lest you think that this problem is going away, I just saw a post today from Chris Jones that was called March Madness, and he talks about how the nitrate levels are exceptionally high in March, where it's usually lower than in other parts of the year. And I just want to read something quickly from that. So he writes, the highest value ever measured in Des Moines during the month of March prior to this year was 13.3 milligrams per liter in 1992. The Raccoon River at Des Moines has exceeded that value on 16 days in 2026, with a new maximum established on March 11th of 16.5 milligrams per liter. And since January 1st, the Raccoon River has been below the EPA maximum for drinking water on only 15 days for the whole year so far. So we're still in a pretty serious problem. And as I think they pointed out in that video, other parts of the state are even more dependent on the water monitoring network than central Iowa. So I will leave it there. Thank you for enduring the tech problems, and thank you, Diane, for setting this up. And I will pass it off to you.
Very good. Thank you, Adam. First of all, thank you for getting ourselves back on track with the tech and for making this shortened version of the meeting available. I think having everything just like boom, 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 really shows it's a very sobering picture, and it underscores why we really need to know what's in our water so we can take steps to fix these problems. Now I'm going to introduce John Norris, and he's going to share policy recommendations that came out of the CISRA report, and he's going to talk specifically on the water sensors too. John.
All right. Thank you, Diane. Let me just pick up on what Adam just said. Thought occurred to me with those numbers that Chris Jones posted today. This doesn't get any better until we take action. We got to stop letting them think they're going to fool us, that what we're doing is working, because it's not. And that is essentially what the CIS report said. Is after a dozen years of the nutrient reduction strategy, we're not making improvements, and so we're really in phase 3 of what I envisioned with this report. First of all, we had 16 scientists devote 4,400 hours to the production of the CIS report, and led by Jen Terry. And that report, if it's over 250 pages, so I'm not going to ask you to read the whole report, but if you would look at the executive summary, which is about 5 or 6 pages, I think that would help steep you in the data and the understanding of what's going on. And then we followed the CIS report with a series of meetings to develop policies. So first of all, we anchored the problem. It can't be denied anymore. And second, we needed to have policy solutions that will address the water quality issue. And that's what I'll talk a little bit about tonight, is the work of about 50 people that worked over the fall to develop a series of policy proposals. We can't go through them all tonight, but that's available through the Harkin Institute. And that's a little shorter read, but there's also an executive summary. There's also an advocate's guide in the back of that report, and a guide for legislators, and a Q&A if you want to engage legislators at your legislative coffees or during the campaign season on questions about what actions are they willing to support to address our water quality crisis in Iowa. Now we're in phase 3, and that is, in fact, the advocacy phase. Define the problem. We've got solutions. Now we need to hold policymakers and candidates for office accountable, because it's my belief, unless we make water a voting issue, this is not going to change. So that's where we're at now, and that's why I appreciate so much you're joining us tonight and doing the follow-up with reaching out to legislators to demand change and minimum demand answers. Will they support what's necessary? The number one priority in the Harkin Institute paper on policies is our water monitoring network. And I'm going to spend the most time on that, so I'm going to save it to the end. But we put that as the number one priority for two reasons. One, we really didn't take politics into mind, into consideration when we did these policies. We just looked at what will work, what do we need to do. But if you look at the current legislative makeup, I think thought optimistically with this group, the best we probably could get is to fund adequate water monitoring. So that's our number one priority, and that's what we're going to really ask you to engage legislators on. I just want to touch on a few of the other broad areas, and again, you can access that report. It's only 16 pages, but it's also got some, like I said, advocate guides and an executive summary. But we really focused on treating the problem at the source. As many of you are probably familiar with the Iowa nutrient reduction strategy, so much of what they've done is edge of field practices and after the problem has already started. We focused on in-field practices such as fall application of fertilizer, which we know is a large percentage of that ends up in the waterways, and addressing that with an increased tax on fall fertilizer that would fund the water monitoring network and a number of other initiatives we proposed. We address the CAFOs and manure management because very little of it is tracked today. And even the filing of the master matrix plans for the CAFOs, there's no tracking or holding accountable for the amount of manure that's put on the land. And so we proposed a new geospatial tracking system, and that CAFO owners have to be accountable for how much animal manure is spread on the land so that that land has the assimilative capacity to absorb and utilize those nutrients. Otherwise, they run into our rivers, lakes, and streams. We address drainage law. Iowa's drainage law is over 100 years old. And so much of what's showing up in our water systems is coming through the tile drainage network. And so we proposed some reforms to the tile drainage law and the governance of drainage districts. Drainage districts have eminent domain authority and taxing authority. And so there's ability for those to be a much bigger player in managing our watersheds. We approached it all from a watershed management strategy. Basically this is gravity, right? We know where the water is coming from. If we manage it by watershed, we can track through testing that water that comes out of the drainage tiles. We can track it back to CAFOs that are over applying manure, and hold people accountable who are over supplying nutrients that are ending up in our water supply. So we also approach the research and education piece, which is to really refocus a lot of the efforts at Iowa State University, refund the Leopold Center, so that we are actually doing research and supporting farmers who want to exercise regenerative farming, rebuilding soil health, being accountable and know how to manage their water and runoff, and look for ways for farmers to diversify and be profitable or more profitable than they are now with this current system excuse me, of high input, high cost, high productivity, but low profit agriculture that our farmers are locked in right now on this hamster wheel. So we don't have time to go through it all today, but I encourage you to look at it. We think there's some real positive solutions there. And again, it's treating the problem at the source. I like to think of how we've approached flood management, which is to build expensive levees when we should be looking at expanding water wetlands areas. We should be looking at rebuilding soil health throughout our farmland that could be more absorbing of water and utilize that water longer. But instead, we build barriers at the end. We're doing the same with these edge of field practices. Some of them are good, but they're incredibly expensive for what they accomplish versus changing practices in the field. So that's really where we focused a lot of these policies. Since we're focused on the state legislature right now, I'm not going to get into it, but we do have a number of federal farm bill recommendations in the policy paper as well. So turning back to number one priority and the water monitoring network. There will be sending, you don't take notes. We're going to send you out, everyone. I think it's a 3-page briefing on the water monitoring network, which will be essentially what I'm going to cover now in a short form. But we think it's extremely important that this be characterized because this is what it is. It is fundamentally a matter of public health. The current monitoring network through the IIHR and University of Iowa and the Iowa Water Quality Information System is set up. It's the only monitoring system in the state that does continuous monitoring. By that I mean they have instantaneous testing going on their 60 sensors plus the 11 USGS sensors and the 8 USDA sensors. They also incorporate data they get from IDALs and DNR, so they can know at any time what is the nitrate runoff coming into water systems. For many municipal systems, they don't have the nitrate removal system like the Des Moines system does, and they don't have the capacity to do upstream testing. This is a matter of public health for them. If they have water coming down into their system, into their municipal system that's above the EPA limits for nitrate, without this continuous monitoring, that goes away and their citizens become vulnerable to high nitrates in the drinking water above the EPA standard. So that's the most important, I think, thing to make is this is a matter of public health, and the system through the University of Iowa is the only continuous water monitoring system that addresses public health. DNR and IDALs do some testing, but they get reports 2 months or a year later from their testing. That has no value today for the water they're drinking. It's all designed around addressing the Gulf of Mexico and the nutrient pollutants that are flowing downstream, of which Iowa is the major contributor amongst the 31 states that make up the watershed that goes into the Gulf of Mexico. There's a proposal right now for IDALs, DNR, USGAS, and a couple other entities to take over. And I say take over, it be the primary monitoring source for our nutrient pollution. The proposal they have right now will get the results from that in 3 years. That hardly addresses instantaneous water quality monitoring, continuous monitoring for a matter of public health. The system at the University of Iowa is about 15 years old. It received an annual appropriation of $500,000 and some initial startup costs. They've invested between $750,000 and $1 million in maintaining that system. It will take over $4 million to rebuild that system if we let it go away. In 2023, the legislature stopped the funding for the University of Iowa's water monitoring system. It has limped along for the last 2 years with a grant from the Walton Foundation of $600,000 and another $100,000 from another pot of Iowa money. That runs out at the end of June. Currently, there have been some counties who've put some money in to keep it going a little bit longer. The Isaac Walton League is doing a GoFundMe page to try and raise money to keep it going. But frankly, I think the pitch to the legislature, in my mind, is public health shouldn't be dependent upon a GoFundMe page to protect people's health and provide Iowans with clean water. So that's. Don't make this complicated for legislators. It is just important to stress the continuous monitoring that the University of Iowa system provides. It directly affects public health. It has been extremely successful. There's no other system that they have or are talking about doing that will replicate that continuous monitoring. And we have recommended, with input from the scientists at the University of Iowa, that it not just be about measuring nitrates, which what the current system does. And that would take an annual appropriation just to continue at level funding of $600,000 a year, a one-time $500,000 appropriation for replacing old equipment, because a lot of this stuff needs to get replaced. But they should be testing for other pollutants beside nitrates. There are a number of other pollutants that are in our water system. Their system still doesn't track this. The scientists recommended that with an annual appropriation of $1 million, they could expand the pollutants and the chemicals that they are testing in that continuous water monitoring to inform public water systems about what's coming into their drinking water. We think that's critically important, especially in lieu of all the recent information and studies on the cancer-causing elements, many of which aren't just nitrates, but there are a number of the other chemicals that are coming into our water system. Again, as the CIS report points out, over 80% or 80% or more comes from agricultural practices. So you'll see in the briefing paper the money that's being requested. There's about $18 million in the Groundwater Protection Fund. That money, I can think of no better use of that money than to allocate the $1 million necessary for this continued water monitoring network through the University of Iowa. That's what we recommend. They can find it wherever they want to, but it doesn't take a new appropriation or new money. It just redirects some of that funding in the Groundwater Protection Fund to make sure we keep this monitoring network going, because of the importance of public health, and not to have to spend $4 million to recreate it should they let it go completely unfunded and have to dismantle it. I probably went too fast there, but I did because I know you're going to get the briefing paper, which covers what I just talked about and more. So I'm going to stop there, and I think, Diane, we wanted to give folks a chance for some questions and answers, and I think Debbie's going next to talk about the lobbying effort.
Yes, so I just wanted to say, everyone, if you've got questions, put it in the Q&A box so we can see them. And we'll get to them as soon as we're done with this next part of our meeting. I mean, it's pretty compelling that we need these water quality sensors. And so I'm going to invite now Debbie Bunker, who's the membership director for the Iowa Farmers Union, to go over our script, some talking points, and everything you need to know to lobby on Wednesday. And Debbie, I'll turn this over to you.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'm, as she said, Debbie Bunker, and I'm with the Iowa Farmers Union. We've been a member of the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture since the very first meeting about 11 years ago. And I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm going to go over the talking points as well as the lobby day script and the follow-up to that, and let you know who to call, that sort of thing. So a lot of this is going to be redundant. So I will try to go not super fast, but as quickly as I can. So here are the talking points. Now, we do not expect you to memorize these or use all of these in your conversations. They're just a number of points you can pick and choose, but we put them here so that you have this available. The University of Iowa, IIHR, the Hydroscience and Engineering, real-time nitrate water monitoring network will end on June 30th unless legislators fund it. These monitors provide critical information for small municipal water systems that depend on warnings of high nitrate levels so they can take measures to protect their communities. Losing the data these sensors provide will put the health of many rural communities at risk. IIHR sensors are different from the other water sensors in Iowa. They're the only ones that continuously monitor for nitrates. DNR sensors only monitor monthly snapshots to report nutrient loads on the Gulf of Mexico dead zone. Water quality has been a concern for Iowans for many years as the situation has grown progressively worse. With over 750 impaired waterways in Iowa, water quality monitoring sensors would impact the number of polluted waterways reported to the Environmental Protection Agency every 2 years. Hiding a problem does nothing to resolve it, and action is needed now. Water quality, Iowans have indicated in a recent global strategy group poll done in February that water quality is an election issue, with 82% of Iowans likely to vote for a candidate who makes protecting clean water a top priority. Water quality is also a health concern. Iowa ranks #2 in the country for cancer. Allocating $1 million to maintain the current monitoring network and expanding it to monitor for additional toxins is possible and necessary. This amounts to only 32 cents per person a year to know what's in our water. Money exists for the sensors in the Groundwater Protection Fund. The fund has about $18 million and is replenished annually with the pesticide and fertilizers fees. The state has funded the IIHR network for 15 years, and allocations from the Groundwater Protection Fund kept it going until 2023, when state legislators defunded the system. The Walton Foundation stepped in to provide stopgap funding. This comes to an end on June 30th. The decision to end water monitoring wasn't due to a lack of money. It was politics at play. The funds were shifted to IDOLs for voluntary conservation practices through the Water Quality Improvement Program. Conservation practices play a role in solving the water quality crisis, but how do we know if these practices are having an effect if we are doing nothing to measure any progress? The water monitoring system was built over the last 15 years at a cost of approximately $4 million. Iowans would lose this investment if the network were abandoned. Rebuilding it at a later date would cost even more. The water quality monitoring system is highly regarded throughout the US. Attempts to discredit the accuracy of the data it provides have proved false. The IIHR analyzes the accuracy of its data, and its data aligns with the DNR data. Finally, your health and well-being are worth 32 cents a day. I'm sure you would agree. Legislators need to fund the water sensors. Constituents are watching how seriously legislators take water quality and the health of all Iowans. So these talking points will be in a package that Diane will be emailing you tomorrow, along with the lobby day script and a link to watch the video again if you'd like. Okay, so call in lobby day script. Our goal here with this is to make it as easy as possible for you to talk to legislators, to your representatives. We've kept it simple, and feel free to make it sound more like you. That would be great. Hello, my name is Debbie, and I'm from Ames. I live in your district. I am deeply concerned about water quality in Iowa, and then add your specific concerns about water quality here, and be sure to, consider the increasing cancer rates, quality of drinking water, loss of recreational opportunities for Iowans, loss of recreation dollars from out of the state, ecosystem health, and the cost and availability of nitrate filtration systems. Whatever you feel you want to include there, please do. Iowa legislators have the power to restore state funding for the water quality monitoring network operated by the IIHR Hydroscience and Engineering at the University of Iowa. I am asking you to vote in favor of this funding. The Iowa Water Quality Information System is the only statewide system that provides real-time and long-term water quality data. To solve the problem, we first need to know exactly what the problem is and how bad it is. Please appropriate a recurring $1 million from the Groundwater Protection Fund directly to IIHR at the University of Iowa. This would cost only 32 cents per person from funds that already exist. If this funding is not restored, Iowans will lose access to data from 60 sensors statewide. Iowans deserve access to clean, safe water, and water monitoring is the first step toward cleaning up the mess we're in. Thank you for your time. So who do we want you to call? We would like you to call your state representative, your state senator, and you can find, if you don't know who they are, you can find their names and contact information. Just Google Find Your Legislator, and it will take you to www.iowa.gov/legislators/find. That sounds more complicated than it is. Just look up Find Your Legislators, and then you just need to type in your address and you're good to go. We would also like you to contact the two people on Agriculture and National Appropriations Committee, the chairs, Senator Tom Shipley and Representative Norlin Mommsen. Their phone numbers and email addresses will be in the package we're sending you tomorrow. You know, when you call your legislators, likely you may just get the switchboard. Leave a message. Don't just hang up or, you know, give up. Leave a message. It's important that they hear in some way or form from you. And then we need to know how your calls went. And in the information packet, we've given you address, online address to report. So after every conversation, please take a moment to jot down information about the call. How did the legislator respond? Do they agree to support funding? Did they say they won't support funding? If so, why? If you were only able to leave a message, please write that down. If you spoke to someone other than the legislator themselves, please let us know. The information will be important for helping IRA map its approach to further legislative action. I just want to say, when you're talking to your legislator, this is pretty basic. I'm sure most of you know this stuff. Do not get in an argument with them. Just say what you have to say, let them reply, and, you know, go your way. It is not worth it getting into an argument with anybody, and it's not productive in the long term. I just want to thank everyone who's here tonight for participating in IRA's Call-in Lobby Day, and thank you for protecting our water. As we have learned, especially in recent times, people power is impossible to resist. It is necessary for and critical to creating the change we want to see. You are all a part of that power, and it's yours to use for good. So get cracking. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Fund the water centers is 32 cents a person a year. Yeah. So it's really nothing, you know, but it's everything for our health and well-being. Okay, so now we have some time for your questions, and and I'm going to bring John and Adam back, and so a question that I have here is you mentioned, John, this study that the USGS and IDLs, USDA, or not DNR, basically there's this proposal for funds to basically look at, you know, the monitoring for Iowa for, you know, which won't really yield anything for a good 3 years or so. Adam, you were telling me about this paper that Colleen Fowle had uncovered at Colleen Fowle is the water director at the Iowa Environmental Council, and she uncovered a USGS paper that was published in 2019 that kind of addressed, you know, some of these points. And I wonder if you would just speak for a moment on that.
Me, you're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess part of what's interesting about it is that I think some of the legislators are getting misinformation from somewhere. We can always speculate where, but one of the legislators believed that there was going to be a study done to compare these DNR sensors to the water monitoring network, and the legislator thought that it was only going to take 6 months to complete that study. And then Colleen looked into it and she found that it would take over 3 years, as Diane mentioned. So someone's giving them misinformation about how quick it would happen. And then the other kind of ironic part of it is that the claim was made that we need this study to compare which monitoring system works better, and do we really need this, sensor network? But Colleen found this paper from 2019 by the USGS, the same organization that is supposed to be looking at it in the future, that already found that the water monitoring network produced important data that was separate from what you could get from that other network. So yeah, so I can track it down and put it in the chat if you haven't already, Diane. But yeah, I thought it was kind of striking that the reasons that are being given for not funding it don't really hold up because the study has already been done. And yeah, it seems like they're getting some interesting information from somewhere.
Yeah, and I would just say there's a paragraph and some bullet points on that in the paper that Diane's going to send out to you all that it describes that. And Adam's right. There's so much hide the ball going on, uh, that's why this is so important to really pin them down on understanding this is the only continuous network. It's proven, it's in place, and we need to keep it going. And thanks, yeah, 32 cents a year for every Iowan. Larry Stone dropped in the chat. We really trying to change the language here a little bit that we're talking about clean water. It's a more powerful statement for public health than water quality. There may be appropriate places to use water quality, but try and weave in clean health as much as you can into your vernacular on this.
And someone was asking about a bill on this funding, and there was some legislation that had been proposed by I think the Democratic Party that would have funded the water sensors for 1 year, but that didn't make it through the funnel. So there's no current legislation that's ongoing right now. But what really needs to happen is that money needs to come through the appropriations during this whole budget process now. So now is the time to really bear down on our legislators to get this funded through the whole budgeting process. And it does not need to go through general fund because there's going to be a whole lot of discussion about what that's going to cover this year. Like John said, there's $18 million in the Groundwater Protection Fund. That's where the money had been coming previously for the water sensors, and that's where it can, still be allocated from again.
Yeah, one more thing that Adam and I have tried to weave into this as well, which is that you'll run some legislators who want to claim, well, they've spent all this money on all these practices and all these practices they've done. That's not measuring water. And so the only measurement that matters is what is provided to the monitoring network, which is what's in our water now. And they just spending money is not a measurement of clean water. It's a way to shift the focus and the accountability. And don't let them get away with that. No, that's fine. We do all these practices, but the most important thing to be able to track the success of those practices and to most importantly protect public health is to monitor the water.
So someone asked a three-part question. Adam, I think you typed the answer to someone, but I don't know if everybody saw it, so I'm going to ask it again. So does the system have the ability to find the source of pollution? Can we place the sensors in targeted locations to measure specific discharges from a facility? If yes, are there any further plans to require accountability, specifically fines that cover the actual cost of the pollution? Who would like to take that one?
Well, I don't know if this directly answers that, but in the policy paper, we took the approach that the people responsible for creating the problem are the ones who are fiscally or financially responsible for cleaning up the problem. And so we proposed a number of revenue sources that would go towards cleaning up the water. That would be, the fall fertilizer tax, a per head livestock in CAFOs fee, to help pay for the monitoring of CAFOs and the geospatial monitoring and all the work around tracking and regulating CAFOs. That we do a incentive for non-owning, non-farmer landowners to deploy conservation practices that would protect soil and protect water. So all the lengthy policies have a number of different revenue sources, any of which could be used, but we're saying we don't even need those for the water monitoring network because there's already existing funds. I saw someone drop in the chat, is there a bill around this? As Diane noted, we're past the funnel, so there's going to be no new legislation around these broader policies, but they do have the appropriations, and the encouragement is to ask legislators to address this through the appropriations process.
And I'll just mention a couple other things too. So first of all, I did want to also just mention for the previous question too, this was kind of referenced earlier, but I posted in the Q&A that there is funds. There actually is currently $23.5 million in the Groundwater Protection Fund. So there is money available that they could easily redistribute to fund this if they decided. There doesn't need to be any new money allocated. But anyways, in relation to this question about finding specific locations and targeting, finding out whether specific facilities are the problem. I think the water sensor network right now is kind of located on sort of larger bodies of water. And so it's not kind of far enough up the little creeks and streams to necessarily pick out specific facilities that are problems. But I posted in the Q&A a link that has a little bit more information about that. But there are groups that do citizen water monitoring in the state of Iowa, Isaac Walton League, Iowa CCI, who's also part of IRA, who do citizen monitoring. And there's also a group called the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. And I want to highlight them in particular because they actually do trainings for citizens who are interested in, like, if they think that there's a specific facility that might be causing problems, how to try to approach that as a community. So I think we need other options for really like pinpointing it. And then of course, Diane and I are also involved in a project right now that's kind of tracking the actual enforcement, even when you do find problematic stuff happening. And as you might imagine, it's not, the penalties right now aren't really keeping up with what's happening. And so I think, down the road, we will need some action there as well.
Thank you. Yes. John, someone was asking how much money is involved. So we know it can come out of the Groundwater Protection Fund. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how much has been funded and what this new ask is and why.
So the original funding was $500,000 a year. It was roughly 15 years ago. It might have been 12, and I apologize, don't remember the exact year. But it went through 2023 when the legislature voted to end that funding, which was that revenue stream that paid for the monitoring network through the University of Iowa and the Iowa Water Quality Information System. So that funding ended in 2023. It's been partially funded now by the Walton Foundation that runs out in June. We are recommending that it be funded at $1 million a year. It would take $600,000 a year now, plus a one-time 500,000 to replace old equipment. And it would take 600,000 just to fund the current nitrate monitoring system. The scientists recommend we actually should be expanding that to other chemical pollutants, and that would cost $1 million a year with the one-time $500,000 equipment replacement, some aging equipment, and so that would what would be going forward. And as we've noted, there's 18 times that amount in the Groundwater Protection Fund that IDOL sweeps in for all their practices and programs they're putting in place. But I don't know of any business that doesn't monitor their success. And that's like almost 5% of the total funds that would be channeled towards monitoring the success and, most importantly, protecting public health.
Very good. Thank you. Let's see. It was stated, oh, where did that go? Just went away, the question. We had a November spike during fall application time of over 50 parts per million in a local beloved spring, Dunning Spring in Decorah. When I called the DNR, they tut-tutted and said there are no legal limits for surface waters, nothing to be done.
I'm trying to read that one too. Say it again, Diane.
Yeah, there was a spike in Dunning Spring in Decorah in the fall, and they called the DNR, and the DNR said there are no legal limits for surface waters, nothing to be done. I think that's true because I think it's drinking water under the
That's
Safe
right.
Drinking Water Act that's regulated and not surface waters. But if you're swimming in surface,
Well, the surface waters are the source for a lot of municipal drinking water. It's only an EPA limit when what's coming out the faucet. And so what happens, and that's why the continuous monitoring is so important, that if that river happens to be a source downstream of drinking water, that they could be notified there's water coming downstream that's above the EPA limit, so that municipalities can blend in other water if they don't have a nitrate filtration system, which most of them don't. That's why it's critical that that we know what's coming down the surface water, but there's no regulation on what is in the surface water.
yeah, yeah. And the thing about the early warning for these municipalities, they're going to have to they're going to test their water anyway. They have to do, but having the early warning gives them an opportunity to jump into action earlier so
Right.
that they're not scrambling at the last minute to try to address a problem that can harm their customers, they're the islands that rely on that drinking water. So it's there's a reason that you want to have you want to know ahead of time. You want to know ahead of time if a tornado is coming so you can get into your basement rather than all of a sudden you open the door and there's a funnel cloud right in front of your door. So I think that's kind of, when some of the, you know, logic behind that. I'm going to have time for one more question. And
Diane, can we take Jay Gilchrist's
that's
question?
what I was going to read. Yes.
Okay. I'd like to answer that actually, if you don't mind.
Sure. And the question
Okay.
is, what message do you suggest for our Democratic legislators who are in support of this?
Pretty much the same message you're giving to all legislators. Just, pick a few points, let them know, why this is important to you. But at the end of the conversation, thank them not only for their time that they've given you, but for supporting the legislation. That's really important because they need to know when they're doing good as well as when they're not doing anything. So that would be, John, you may have something to add to that.
No, I think that's right. Same message, but also ask them, do they know of any other legislators that are not Democrats that might be approachable on this, persuadable on this, so we can track that and reach out to those, or you can reach out to them, or we can find somebody from their district to reach out to them that would help maybe get them on board.
And I will add that, there are some Republicans that are very warm to this too.
Yes.
And one of the things at a recent legislative forum that I attended that the Iowa Environmental Council has for its members is that the legislators are feeling the heat. They're getting a lot of calls, they're getting a lot of um, people writing to them. And we're gaining some ground. We have to keep at it. We have to keep working at it, but and we can't let it go. But they are feeling the heat. So I think, we are doing something, and this call and lobby day on Wednesday is going to continue to build that heat, for these legislators. So I want people to know that the efforts that have been taking place so far are pushing, in our direction, but we have to keep at it so that we can really get this over the finish line. So it's a big, it's not going to be an easy overnight thing, but I think the more people speak out, we've got the whole cancer issue in Iowa. We've got all the nitrate issues in our water. Um, I think that there's a lot we can use and are using to push for this. And I think our legislators are listening. Some of them are listening, and we could get more to listen more.
And
So,
please let us know how things go. We
yes.
would love to have you report back.
And someone had mentioned in one of the questions that the link for the reporting in was not live. That link is now live. It is now published. So thank you, whoever told us that. So I think we'll wrap it up for this evening. It was a really good meeting with you, John and Adam. I want to really thank both of you, John Norris and Adam Shriver, for being with us here tonight. I want to thank them for all they're doing to keep the focus on water quality, on agriculture, on water sensors, on our public health. So as we've mentioned, this meeting is being recorded. I'll be uploading it to the IRA YouTube page. I'll cut out the tech issues, but it'll get uploaded tomorrow. You'll get a link to the recording and all the links that were in the chat tonight. And I really want to encourage you to share this information with your family and friends. Encourage them to make calls too. We'll just keep, pounding the pavement and turning up the heat. And I also want to announce another meeting that's going to be specifically on the water sensor network with the creator and the manager of the network, Larry Weber, at the IIHR, Hydroscience and Engineering, next Monday night, April 6th at 7 o'clock. And that's organized by Jefferson County Farmers and Neighbors, JFAN. And Larry's going to do a deeper dive on the network itself. So, he'll cover some of the stuff we talked about tonight, but he'll go into it in even more depth, and you'll get a real good sense of how these sensors differ from the other sensors and how they operate and interact with each other, how that information is really accessible to all of us, and why it would be such a loss if this is not funded and we don't have this program, this whole network. So I really encourage you to join JFAN next Monday. There's a link in the chat, and we'll also send that link out. And when you get that link, I encourage you to send it to your state legislators, because Larry wasn't invited to give a presentation specifically on the sensors at the State House this year. It would have been very helpful if he was. And so we would like our legislators to see that. So please forward that to your legislators as well and encourage them to watch it. All righty. So thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Debbie. I want to thank Jonathan Lawrence, who is doing the back end work for us tonight. to thank you for this good meeting tonight. Really appreciate your being here. Appreciate everyone who's here tonight. Let's jump on those phones on Wednesday. Call our legislators. Urge them to fund the water sensors at $1 million a year from the Groundwater Protection Fund at a cost of only 32 cents a person each year. And then just let us know how those calls went. So thank you all for being with us here tonight. And remember, we are all worth 32 cents. Thank you. Bye-bye.